At this moment, two young men were preparing to duel in front of their armies. On the battlefield, settling disputes in this way can minimize casualties on both sides. Because both sides are Englishmen, it's just that the two sides disagree. Young Percy, the son of the Earl of Northumberland, had insulted King Henry IV at a banquet, and the king could not tolerate his rudeness.
I believe yours to be the ramblings of a crazy old demon.
Harry, please, stop this.
Oh no, let him speak. I wish to hear.
My liege.
Yours are the ramblings of an old man so saturated with malice and mistrust that he no longer knows up from down, can no longer see beyond the walls of his own monstrous sloths. My family have served you. We aided you in your ascension, and still we fight for you. Cousin Mortimer has fought for you.
The reason was that his cousin Mortimer was captured by the rebels, but King Henry IV refused to pay the ransom. Henry IV believed that Mortimer had betrayed England, and Henry IV did not want to pay the ransom. Young Percy was nicknamed Hotspur, which means a hot-tempered person, so it's no surprise that young Percy shows up on the battlefield. But it's a little strange that Prince Henry, who's across the street from him, shows up here. Prince Henry, titled the Prince of Wales from a young age, was the heir to the English throne. Due to disagreements with his father, he was distanced from court and spent his days among the common people, but fate wouldn't let him sink. His father summoned him to the palace, claiming ill health and impending death. Upon returning, Hal discovered his father was healthy and had even declared his brother Thomas as the successor. Hal had no objections but mentioned young Percy's rebellion. He argued that young Percy merely wanted to rescue his cousin Mortimer from Wales and had done nothing wrong, making war unnecessary. However, Thomas, eager to prove himself to his father, was uninterested in other matters and only wanted to gain glory in battle. Hal expressed concern over this. King Henry IV, however, did not give Hal a chance to speak further and dismissed him. North of Shrewsbury, Thomas led the English royal forces to meet the Northumbrian army. As battle loomed, Hal arrived on horseback, challenging young Percy to a duel to avoid large-scale casualties. Thomas was displeased, feeling Hal was stealing his glory. Hal was actually worried about his brother Thomas, knowing the war was instigated by King Henry IV forcing the Percy family into rebellion. A duel was the best way to minimize losses. Thomas was still complaining about Hal stealing the credit when his opponent said he didn't agree to the duel. Thomas was very happy to hear his opponent's words. At that moment, young Percy came alone to fight with Hal.
Where's Henry? Come to fight him in our army's stead.
This fight need not be had, Percy. My father will soon be dead. Your grievances will die with him.
Don't be afraid of our small contest, young Hal. Promise to finish it quickly.
Both were fully armored, their movements hindered by the heavy gear. Young Percy picked up a sword, intending to kill Hal, but failed. At this point, young Percy's father arrived to watch the fight. The battle between the two entered into a white-hot. Both sides of the physical strength is a little tired. Hal can only passive defense. He was beaten by his opponent in a very difficult situation. In a panic, he pulled out the short sword on his waist. As young Percy attacked, he stumbled, and Hal seized the opportunity to stab him with the dagger. Hal emerged victorious from the duel, tossing young Percy's helmet at Thomas's feet.
Come with me now, Thomas, please. Walk away from this field.
However, Thomas was indifferent to Hal's words, seeing only a threat to his future rule's legitimacy. So, after winning the duel, he still attacked the Northumbrian army. Ultimately, Thomas died on a meaningless battlefield. Hal donned a red robe and wielded a scepter as he was officially crowned King Henry V.
All hail King Henry!
With Thomas's death, King Henry IV had no choice but to pass the English throne to Hal. But it's a good thing Hal's not sick of being king. He's just sick of what his father did. Upon ascending the throne, Henry V faced provocation from France. All the other kings sent wonderful or surprising gifts. But the Dauphin of France sent a ball. This gift was neither beautiful nor surprising, and its implication was far from positive. As king, Hal endured this humiliation in front of everyone, believing that England should first address internal divisions. However, the Archbishop raised the issue of land ownership in France during a council meeting, referencing the Salic law, which pertained to female royal inheritance rights. The Archbishop's main point was that France currently held lands belonging to England. After hearing this, Hal firmly stated that he had already decided not to invade France. After the meeting, William also felt that France was mocking England. Soon, they discovered an assassin sent by the French king. Henry got past William to where the assassin was being held. The assassin claimed he had never met King Charles and had only received an assassination order. Back in the council, Henry remained hesitant, as launching a military campaign immediately after ascending the throne was not his intention, yet everyone around him advised him to go to war. Thus, Henry decided to send a letter to Charles, stating that if Charles wanted to wage war, he would respond, and that assassination attempts were disgraceful. Charles quickly replied, denying any involvement in an assassination plot against King Henry V. However, William argued that the enemy's vile actions had been exposed, prompting their denial. He claimed Charles aimed to overthrow King Henry V's rule. Consequently, King Henry V declared war on France.
As of this day, we are at war with France.
Subsequently, he removed 2 ministers closely tied to France, one of whom was his cousin, Cambridge. King Henry wants to start a war, so he must have people he trusts around him. The ministers all had their own ideas, so he thought of a friend in the city. John, a former soldier with a distinguished record, despised the battlefield due to witnessing its horrors. He agreed to join the campaign if King Henry paid off his tab at the tavern. For King Henry, this was a simple task. Thus, John became a general. Henry led his army across the English Channel, successfully landing in France. However, the first landing point was an empty village, with only a donkey in sight. The villagers had fled to a distant castle. After assembling the trebuchets, Henry ordered their launch. The fireballs that were thrown cut through the sky and smashed into the fortress. The soldiers continued their bombardment from day to night, and night to day. The prolonged siege strategy began to wear on Dorset. He argued that the siege seemed endless, and they had no idea how much supply the castle held. Dorset believed that the longer the siege dragged on, the more disadvantageous it would be for the forces that had crossed the sea. By then, perhaps the French would not need to take action, as hunger and disease would defeat the English troops. King Henry did not want to send his soldiers into an uncertain battle. Although a siege was time-consuming, it was the method with the least casualties. At this moment, the Archbishop arrived at the camp and suggested bypassing the fortress. Hearing this, Henry sarcastically remarked that the Archbishop was a military genius, then stepped out of the tent. As he emerged, he received good news. The enemy had surrendered. The castle lord knelt before Henry, pleading only for the release of women and children. Henry, having taken the castle, agreed to his request, allowing them 1 night to leave, while the soldiers would become prisoners. He then personally helped the castle lord to his feet. The lord of the city dragged his feet for so long before surrendering. In fact, he was waiting for reinforcements from the Prince of France in France, but he didn't realize that an acute illness was spreading in the city, so he had to surrender early. That night, while Henry was resting, he received news that the French prince had arrived and wished to speak with him. Upon meeting Henry, the prince sarcastically congratulated him on his small victory and proceeded to insult him. The French prince spoke at length, while Henry remained expressionless. Watching the prince's endless monologue, Falstaff grew drowsy. The prince glanced at Falstaff and then turned his gaze back to Henry.
Have you heard what I said? I have. It was stirring. Sir John, please walk with me. Good night.
After leaving the tent, Henry instructed Falstaff to gather the troops immediately. As the English forces continued their march inland, an unfortunate event occurred.
I want you to deliver a gift to your king. Will you do this for me?
The French prince attacked children in the woods, enraging Henry. He ordered Falstaff to strengthen the camp's defenses and execute the captured French soldiers, displaying them by the river as a warning.
The first command I'll heed. The second, you'll have to carry out that mass execution yourself.
What did you say to me?
You are not that man.
He reminded Henry that as a king he should not expose his emotions to others. Eventually, Henry calmed down, understanding Falstaff's well-intentioned advice. So, he decided to seek alternative ways to confront the challenge posed by the French prince, rather than resorting to indiscriminate slaughter. Everyone arrived at a hill, and Henry sent the fastest rider to scout the area. The hill before them was filled with tents. After returning to the camp, they began discussing their next course of action. They were at a disadvantage in both numbers and terrain, making it nearly impossible to fight this battle. Some commanders even suggested retreating. However, Henry proposed that they could use England's longbows to inflict damage, as the range of the French crossbows was insufficient, which was England's advantage. Yet even with this, they could at most eliminate a portion of the enemy. The longbows wouldn't be able to fully leverage their strengths. At that moment, Falstaff declared that they could win this battle. This was the first time Falstaff had voiced his opinion since arriving. Everyone turned to him, eager to learn how they could secure victory in this war. Falstaff's strategy was to have the soldiers fight on foot and not wear armor. The crowd looked at him in disbelief, but Falstaff insisted that it would rain the next day, making the ground slippery and muddy. He explained to them that the French cavalry would certainly be mounted and wearing armor, which would weigh them down and hinder their effectiveness in battle. At that point, they could send a small group of armored soldiers as bait to draw on the enemy's forces, while the remainder of their troops would launch an attack from the sides. Falstaff's old knee injury from earlier battles made him feel that there was going to be rain, and it turned out just as he expected. The next day, Falstaff donned heavy armor and stood at the forefront of the ranks. Falstaff's strategy relied on waiting for the rain. As the hill was already a swamp, after the rain, it would become even muddier. In the opinion of the Prince of France, this group of Englishmen are stupid. Dozens of heavy armor soldiers want to fight with themselves. It is a joke. At this moment, Henry had already positioned his lightly armored English soldiers in ambush within the woods. Falstaff specifically instructed them to wait until all of the enemy's cavalry had entered the muddy ground before launching their charge. With a wave of his hand, the French prince sent his heavily armored cavalry down the slope. At Henry's command, the archers drew their bows and shot towards the hill, inflicting heavy casualties on the advancing French cavalry. The remaining French cavalry charged forward. Falstaff ordered his soldiers to halt and prepare for battle. As the French heavily armored cavalry crashed into Falstaff's ranks, some soldiers were knocked down, while others bravely fought back, dragging the cavalrymen off their horses. The battlefield descended into chaos, with armored soldiers rolling in the mud. He killed multiple enemies in quick succession, and the quagmire affected his movements just as much, leaving him to crawl on the ground in a sorry state. As more and more enemies poured in, Falstaff found himself immobilized. The French prince, aware of his numerical advantage, ordered all his cavalry to charge. Henry watched as the French cavalry poured out, then reached for his weapon, ready to engage. The archers launched another attack, and a shower of arrows rained down, claiming the lives of countless French cavalrymen. Henry ordered the English soldiers in the woods to advance. The lightly armored English troops joined the battle. Henry fought valiantly, his movements agile as he brought down one heavily armored French soldier after another. Exhausted, Henry knelt on the ground and looked up at the sky, which had begun to rain again. The rain was an added burden for the heavily armored French soldiers. The weight of their armor combined with the muddy ground made it difficult for them to move. After defeating one enemy, Henry looked up to see the French prince riding toward him. The prince proposed a duel to settle the matter, yet he had not learned from his previous failures, still clad in ornate heavy armor. And he drew his sword. The soldiers from both sides ceased fighting and gathered around to watch in silence. The French prince fastened his helmet, striking a handsome pose as he readied himself for the duel. However, he found himself in a rather awkward situation, as the extravagant armor made it hard for him even to stand. Henry thrust his sword into the ground, then nodded to his men, signaling them to move toward the French prince. With the battle coming to an end, the soldiers began to gather their weapons and take prisoners. Henry walked over to Falstaff's body and sat down beside his old friend for one last moment. He wanted to cry, but a king cannot cry. Although Henry had proven his bravery, he also felt an overwhelming sense of sorrow. Falstaff also proved himself. He did not die in vain in a tavern, but rather honorably on the battlefield.
Hail the king!
Hail the king.
Faced with a large number of prisoners, Henry weighed the potential dangers of the future and resolutely decided to order the execution of all captives. He understood that today's mercy could lead to tomorrow's tragedy. With the defeat of the French prince, France was now incapable of resistance. King Charles came to meet Henry and expressed his intention to surrender. He then proposed that his daughter Catherine marry Henry. In this way, the war seemed to transform into a familial matter. The war came to an end, and Henry married King Charles's daughter Catherine, acquiring a vast amount of French territory. Upon returning to England, Henry received a warm welcome from the people. However, at that moment, Catherine questioned Henry's military actions. She said that her father had never sent assassins and had no plans for assassination. She was so certain because she had been by her father's side when the news of the war broke. She informed Henry that the assassination was not her father's scheme. Listening to Catherine, Henry suggested that if it wasn't King Charles, then it must have been the French prince who orchestrated it. Catherine argued that the French prince lacked the intelligence for such a plan. If there was a plot, it was likely devised by someone else. In Catherine's view, Henry was merely a vain and foolish young man, being manipulated without even realizing it while still celebrating his victory. Henry began to contemplate the logic and truth behind the situation and seemed to grasp the underlying conspiracy. At that moment, William was preparing his formal attire when Henry entered without knocking. Seeing William reveling in the joy of victory, he asked about his family situation. William slowly replied that his family raised about 4,000 sheep and owned thousands of acres of beautiful land. Henry then asked, "So, how much land have you acquired in France?" William, somewhat displeased, said, "That remains to be determined." At this point, Henry had already sensed that the incident with the French provocation was closely tied to William. When Henry inquired about the assassins, William's answers were completely different from what he had stated before. Henry's patience wore thin in an instant, and he angrily told William to stop pretending. William knelt before Henry, and in that moment, as he bowed his head, Henry plunged a dagger into William's skull. Henry sought out his wife Catherine, hoping she would be entirely honest with him, even if the truth was painful. He wanted her to speak candidly. Catherine agreed to Henry's request, and they clasped hands, the cheers of the crowd celebrating their victory ringing in their ears.